Hi, I am Aurel Enriquez, and this presentation contains our discussion on the human blood. This is also the first component of our discussion on the cardiovascular system, together with the heart and blood vessels. Listed here are the functions of the blood. If you would remember from our discussion on the human organism, nabanggit na po natin itong number 1, at least in passing, di ba po? So blood within the cardiovascular system transports gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. It also transports nutrients. Dinideliver daw po ng blood circulation natin yung nutrients that we have acquired from eating to all the other parts of the body that need the nutrients, and of course the blood circulation could also bring with them the waste products that has been produced by our cells para po madala ito dun sa mga organ systems that are responsible for getting rid of these waste products. Next, focus muna po tayo sa mga nilagyan ko ng highlights. Okay? So next is protection against foreign substances. Kasama rin po sa mga cellular components ng human blood ay yung mga white blood cells, which primarily works as part of our immune system. So we'll talk more about those when we get to our discussion on the lymphatic system. Now, if we were to look into the liquid components of the blood, we would also find proteins like antibodies or complement components and other substances that help with inflammation, fighting microbial pathogens, and other stuff like that, which again is part of our immunity. All right, so yung mga nabanggit po na liquid components, you'll learn more about those pagdating nyo naman po sa third year immunology classes ninyo. All right, and then here at number 7, the blood is also responsible for clot formation. So mamaya po at the later part of this discussion, we would also briefly talk about what clot formation is and why this should happen. Let's now talk about the components of the human blood. So first up is plasma. The plasma is the liquid component that makes up 55% of human blood. So mentioned here is a further breakdown of other specific components. Ang plasma daw po natin contains 91% water, 7% of different proteins, and 2% of other substances. Next are the formed elements. So kung yung plasma daw po ay liquid, ang formed elements naman po ay solid structures, specifically consisting of cells and cell fragments. So listed here are the different cells that we would observe from blood samples. So erythrocytes are more commonly known as RBCs or red blood cells. Leukocytes are more commonly known as WBCs or white blood cells, and thrombocytes are also referred to as platelets. So as we proceed, i-discuss din po natin yung functions ng bawat isa sa mga yan. Let's now talk about the different proteins that we may find in the plasma. So, di ba po kanina, we learned that the human blood is composed of 91% water, 7% of different proteins, and 2% of other liquid substances. So, dito po, let's now discuss specifically what are these 7% of proteins. First up is albumin. So, ito po yung pinakamadami sa kanila. It takes up or it would make up 58% of the total plasma proteins only. Alright? So, ulitin natin, dun sa loob ng 7% na proteins na yon, ang 58% doon ay gawa sa albumin. And one of its most important function is helping maintain water balance. Now, how does albumin do that? Albumin produces an osmotic effect because of its large molecular weight. And to oversimplify, this helps keep fluid from leaking out of your blood vessels into other tissues. Okay, so without enough albumin, fluid can leak out of the blood, and this could build up in the tissues within our body where there shouldn't be excess fluid. Alright, so ayan po, tumutulong daw po ang albumin para panatilihin na nasa blood circulation natin yung fluid components at hindi tumatagas papunta dun sa ibang tissues natin na hindi dapat nandun yung fluid components. Alright, so again, that helps maintain water balance. Next are globulins. So globulins make up 38% of the total plasma proteins. Ang globulins po, specifically ang mga immunoglobulins, they work with our immune system. So again, this is something that we would talk more about pagdating po natin ng lymphatic system. So for now, ang kailangan na munang tandaan, globulins or immunoglobulins, they are plasma proteins that is needed by our immune system. Next is fibrinogen, which is used in clot formation. So again, as we progress through this chapter, we'll also briefly discuss how clot formation happens and kung kailan magagamit itong fibrinogen. This slide provides us a visual representation of the components of the blood. So this sample may be obtained after performing phlebotomy, as shown here on this top left photo. So after that, isi-centrifuge muna po natin yung blood sample for us to be able to obtain this. Alright, so this is a solution that has been separated into different layers and the different components. So now, assuming, let's safely assume na merong anticoagulant yung tube na pinaglagyan ng blood sample. After that, because of the anticoagulant, we would be able to obtain plasma. Alright, so ulitin natin. Kapag may anticoagulant, yung tube na pinaglagyan ng blood sample, we will be able to obtain what is known as plasma. Okay, so pagdating nyo po sa PMTP2 classes nyo in your second year, matututunan nyo may isa pa po na component tayong pwedeng makuha, which is serum. Yun naman po ay makukuha nyo kung example, yung pinaglagyan ng blood sample na tube is walang anticoagulant. Kapag walang anticoagulant, you would be able to acquire what is known as a serum. But for the purposes of this discussion, let's safely assume that the tube where this blood sample was placed in contains an anticoagulant. And therefore, what we have right here on the topmost layer is a plasma. All right? So, ayan po. The plasma, as seen here, is the fluid on top. And also indicated here are the components of the plasma that we've discussed in the previous slides. All right? So, again, there's 91% water, and then there's albumin for water balance. There are immunoglobulins that is for immunity, and then fibrinogen is for blood clotting. All right, and then listed here are the components of the other 2%. All right, and then dito naman po sa ibaba yung mga cellular components, otherwise referred to as the formed elements. Let's now talk about hematopoiesis. Hematopoiesis is the process of blood cell production. Yung mga nabanggit po kanina na RBCs, WBCs, and platelets, they are created within the human body through hematopoiesis. So in the fetus, there's quite a lot of places where hematopoiesis could occur, like at the liver, thymus, spleen, lymph nodes, and of course at the red bone marrow. Pero mababawasan po ito after birth until our entire adulthood. So after birth, hematopoiesis would now only happen in the red bone marrow, while some white blood cells are produced in the lymphatic tissues. All formed elements, or the cellular components of the human blood, arise from stem cells that are called hemocytoblast. Hemocytoblast. So ulitin po natin, yung mga blood cells daw po natin, lahat sila, kahit magkakaiba sila, they came from just one type or population of stem cells called hemocytoblast. Kumbaga, just imagine, isa lang daw po yung mama nila, whether they are an RBC, WBC, or a thrombocyte. But what happens next? Now, how are all these different cells being produced by this one hemocytoblast? So this happens through differentiation. So the stem cells or hemocytoblasts would differentiate and give rise to various or different cell lines, which would lead to the formation of a particular type of cell. Mas maiintindihan po natin ito as we look at the illustration on the next slide. This slide shows us the most simplified illustration on how hematopoiesis happens. Right here, at the very beginning, we'd start off with this one hematopoietic stem cells. It eventually differentiates into one of these two cells. Yung hematopoietic stem cell daw po na ito, kaya niyang mag-differentiate or mag-evolve into either a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell. So kung halimbawa, for example, it differentiates into a lymphoid stem cell, this one would eventually mature into a lymphocyte. All right, so if we were to look at these, now imagine these as kind of like Pokemons, like Charmander. So example, Charmander would evolve into Charmeleon, and then Charmeleon evolves into Charizard. So kumbaga parang ito daw po yung final evolution niya based on this illustration only. So that's kind of like a simplified explanation on what happens with these stem cells papunta dun sa matured types of cell. Now, that is based only on this illustration, okay? So, pagdating po sa discussion natin on the lymphatic system, doon po matututunan natin na may next evolution pa po ang mga lymphocytes, all right? But for now, just remember, no, a hematopoietic stem cell could differentiate or quote-unquote evolve into a lymphoid stem cell, and then this lymphoid stem cell evolves into a lymphocyte. Now, let's start over. Let's start over and look at this hematopoietic stem cell. If, for example, this one stem cell eventually differentiates into a myeloid stem cell, as shown here, marami pa pong ibang cells na pwede siyang maging paglaki niya. Alright, so hindi po katulad dito that if it differentiates into a lymphoid stem cell, it could only mature into a lymphocyte. Now, this myeloid cell could eventually become an erythrocyte or an RBC. It could mature to become a neutrophil or an eosinophil or a basophil or a monocyte. Okay, so that's a myeloid stem cell. Pwede rin naman po, no, that this hematopoietic stem cell could evolve into a myeloid stem cell, and then the myeloid stem cell evolves into a megakaryocyte. So a megakaryocyte would break off into tiny pieces, and that becomes the thrombocytes or the platelets. All right, do take note though, no? Do take note na ang mga neutro, eosino, basophils, monocytes, and lymphocytes, no? Itong limang ito dito sa baba, sila po yung mga tinatawag na white blood cells in general. Okay, so these five right here, neutro, eo, basophil, monocyte, and lymphocyte, they are collectively referred to as white blood cells. Let's now talk more about erythrocytes or RBCs. So the red blood cells, they are disc-shaped with thick edges. All right, so as we can see right here in this illustration, makapal daw po yung surrounding or yung outer edge nila. All right, so para silang pizza. Di ba? Yung structure po ng isang pizza, merong crust sa paligid, di ba? So yung crust sa paligid, mas makapal in comparison to the inside. Alright, so ganun daw po yung structure ng isang RBC. I can't believe I just compared our RBCs into pizza. Anyway, the next fact about erythrocytes is that the nucleus is lost during development. Alright, so hindi po katulad ng ibang mga cells na madidiscuss natin later. Ang mga RBCs po, wala na silang nucleus. Alright, so as an RBC matures, they lose their nucleus. Alright, now this is necessary. Na medyo mahalaga po itong step na to na ilalet go nila yung nucleus nila to have more space for hemoglobin to have more areas to carry oxygen. Alright? Kasi po kung may nucleus pa dito sa loob, makikihati pa yun sa lugar kung saan pwede siyang magbit-bit ng oxygen. Or yun nga, yung mga molecules na kailangan nito to carry that oxygen. We'll talk more about that later. Next po, RBCs live for about 120 days. So, ang lifespan daw po ng isang matured RBC is 120 days. If anybody here has seen the anime Cells at Work, ayan, isa po yun sa mga inaabangan ko dun eh. Kailan kaya magwa 120 days? Yung bida na RBC. Kasi parang nakarami na siya ng episodes, no? Pero parang hindi pa siya umaabot dun sa 120 days niya, which if we really think about it, it's not a long time. Alright? Next po, with regards to the function, no, the main function of our RBCs is to transport oxygen to the tissues. Let's now get to know how an RBC is able to transport oxygen. This is because RBCs have the protein hemoglobin. Alright, hemoglobin. This is the main component of RBCs, and as the name implies, it is composed of a heme portion and a globin portion. So the globin is attached to the heme. The heme has an iron attached to it, and then the iron has an oxygen molecule that is attached to it. Alright, so I hope you understood that. No? Ulitin po natin, an RBC is mainly composed of the protein hemoglobin. Doon sa globin part, may nakadugtong na heme. Sa heme, may nakalagay na iron. Sa iron, doon kumakapit yung oxygen. And there you have it. That's how RBCs carry and transport oxygen. Now, just another terminology po, when a hemoglobin molecule has an oxygen molecule that is attached to it, then together we would refer to that as an oxyhemoglobin. Again, hemoglobin plus oxygen equals oxyhemoglobin. This illustration just shows us how the hemoglobin molecule is structured and where the iron molecule is located within the heme portion. So ulitin po natin, this is the entire hemoglobin molecule. There are 4 different segments or parts of globin, and then within those, nasa loob daw po nung globin is yung heme. Now, if we were to zoom in on that, this is what one heme molecule would look like. Ulitin natin, this blue circle right here, this is one heme molecule. As you can see, in the middle, right here in the middle, nandun yung iron. And dito po sa iron, doon kumakapit yung oxygen. Now, how is the production of erythrocytes initiated? So there are 3 steps that are shown here. First step, there is decreased blood O2 levels. So kapag mababa daw po yung oxygen level sa blood natin, the kidneys would be able to detect or sense this, and this would increase the production of the hormone erythropoietin. Alright, let's repeat that. Kapag bumaba daw po yung oxygen levels in our blood, the kidneys would now be triggered to increase the production of the hormone erythropoietin. Now, erythropoietin would stimulate the bone marrow to produce more erythrocytes. So, ang trabaho daw po ng erythropoietin is para utusan yung red bone marrow to produce more erythrocytes. Now, after there is an increased erythrocyte production, there would also be an increase in blood O2 levels. Kasi diba, dumami na yung places or dumami na yung cells kung saan pwedeng mag-bind yung oxygen na nai-inhale natin. So that would bring back the O2 levels up, papunta sa normal levels. Alright, so this illustration right here just shows us what happens in the previous slide, or the thing that I explained in the previous slide. So again, first scenario is that there is decreased blood oxygen. Na-detect daw po ng brain natin and ng kidneys natin na konti lang yung oxygen in the blood. So what would happen is our kidney would be pushed to release or increase the amount of the hormone erythropoietin. Okay? Decreased blood oxygen triggers the kidneys to increase their release of erythropoietin. Now, erythropoietin would start working and telling the bone marrow to also up or to increase red blood cell production. Now, when that red blood cell production increases, of course, they would create more RBCs. There would now be more areas kung saan pwedeng kumapit yung oxygen. And this would ultimately lead to increased blood oxygen levels. So that is how RBC production would happen. This slide talks about what happens to RBCs after they live out their 120 days. So pagkatapos daw po ng 120 days, at tapos na din yung buhay nila, what would happen to these old red blood cells? Old RBCs are removed by macrophages in the spleen and liver. So kapag luma na daw po ang isang RBC, and nag-flow sila through the liver or spleen, yung mga macrophages daw po sa liver or spleen, madedetect nila na luma na yung mga RBCs na to and they need to be eliminated. So after that, the macrophages would break apart the RBCs and then further breaks down their hemoglobin structure. So the globin portion would be further broken down into smaller amino acid units, and the heme portion would be converted into bilirubin. So, yung iron naman po na nasa gitna ng initial heme structure, i-recycle na lang po ito. So, gagamitin ulit for other purposes, or kung may mga bagong RBCs na magagawa, then sa kanila po mapupunta yung previous na iron molecule. And as stated here on the last bullet, bilirubin is taken up by the liver and released into the small intestine as part of bile. Alright, so pagdating po natin sa discussion natin on the digestive system, we'll find out what is bile and what is it used for. So for now, tandaan lang po muna that when heme is broken down, it becomes bilirubin. Bilirubin then goes to the liver. This slide just shows us a visual representation of the things that I explained on the previous slide. So we'll start off with a hemoglobin molecule. All right, so as we can see right here, the globin becomes amino acids. Next, the heme portion, it would lose its iron molecules. All right, the iron molecules would now be recycled. The rest of the heme portion first becomes biliverdin, and then biliverdin would become bilirubin. All right, so after that, bilirubin goes to the liver, and then some of it would be used to make bile, while some of them would be excreted either through the urine or feces. Let's now talk about leukocytes. Leukocytes are more commonly referred to as white blood cells or WBCs. So WBCs, they don't have hemoglobin, all right? Because they don't need it. Okay? Ang hemoglobin po, this is primarily a component of erythrocytes or RBCs because they need it, all right? So kasama sa trabaho nila, kailangan nila yung hemoglobin molecule to perform their function. Again, that's for RBCs. But for WBCs, may iba silang trabaho. They have a different function. They don't need a hemoglobin. Next, in terms of size, they are larger than RBCs. And another thing is that they contain a nucleus. So again, i-compare po natin, WBCs don't have hemoglobin, but RBCs have hemoglobin. WBCs are larger, RBCs are smaller. Next, WBCs have a nucleus, RBCs don't have a nucleus. Listed here are the main functions of white blood cells. They fight off infections, and then they also remove dead cells and debris via phagocytosis. Alright? So yung mga foreign materials, yung mga foreign substances na kinalaban nila during an infection or during the detection of a foreign substance, of course, after destroying those foreign pathogens or substances, yung mga debris or yung mga waste materials na mapoproduce nito is also removed by the WBCs through phagocytosis. And tulad na nabanggit natin kanina, old RBCs may also be removed by leukocytes or the dead cells. Let's now talk about the different types of leukocytes. First up are granulocytes. So as the name implies, these are cells with granules, okay? Granulocytes, cells with granules. So they contain specific granules, and this would include the neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. So first up, let's talk about neutrophils. Neutrophils are the most common or the most abundant WBC in our circulation. So, ang mga neutrophils daw po, sila yung pinakamadaming number na WBC sa circulation natin. So, if they remain in the blood for 10 to 12 hours and then they move to the tissues. So, neutrophils are how do we say this? Neutrophils are also classified as phagocytes or cells that could engulf other materials. All right. So again, when we say phagocytes, these are types of cells that have the capability to engulf materials. So again, that's for neutrophils. Next are eosinophils. These are responsible for reducing inflammation, and they're also capable of destroying parasites. Okay, so for now, huwag pong kakalimutan yung functions ng eosinophils. Alright? In cases of inflammation, kapag sumusobra na daw po yung inflammation reaction ng katawan natin, eosinophils have the capability to reduce that. And one of the functions na well-known, very well-known ang eosinophils is that they could fight or they could destroy parasites. So, pag may parasitic infection po ang isang patient, ang WBC that is mainly working or that is mainly in action during parasitic infections are the eosinophils. Next are the basophils. They are the least common, alright? So, pinakakaunti, no? Pinakakonti na leukocyte na meron tayo ay yung mga basophils. Even in a blood smear observation of a regular healthy person, hindi rin po madaling makahanap ng mga basophils, no? So, yun po. With regards to their function, they release histamine and heparin. Next, we're still talking about leukocytes, okay? Mga WBCs pa rin po ang pinag-uusapan natin. But these ones have been classified as agranulocytes, alright? Agranulocytes. So, cells without granules, alright? So, they don't have specific granules. So, first up are monocytes. These are the largest sized WBCs, alright? So, compare sa lahat nung na-discuss natin earlier, the neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils, and also yung lymphocytes kasama na dito, yung monocytes daw po yung pinakamalaki sa kanilang lahat in terms of size. Now, these ones are also capable of producing macrophages. In some references, they use it interchangeably. Pinagbabaliktad na po or napagbabaliktad na po yung term na monocytes and macrophages. But when you get to your hematology classes, pagdating nyo po ng third year, no, mas may explain pa po sa inyo yung different scenarios wherein you would use either the term monocyte or macrophages. But for now, ayan po, just remember no, that monocytes may be similar with macrophages. Next are lymphocytes. They're mainly involved in immune response. Okay, so lymphocytes are involved in immune response. Katulad na lang ng ating lymphatic system. So it's quite easy to remember, di ba? The organ system in our body that is involved in immunity is the lymphatic system. The types of cells that are involved in our immunity are the lymphocytes, all right? So there are different types. There are either T cells and B cells, and yung mga T cells and B cells po, may mga subcategories pa to or subtypes. Now, lymphocytes, they lead to the production of antibodies. This slide shows us the different types of white blood cells. So first up, here on figure A, this is a neutrophil. Notice that it is a it has a multi-segmented nucleus. Right? So, tingnan natin, iisa lang po talaga yung nucleus niya. Okay? Pero, meron kasi siyang parang hati-hati. So, it is divided into kind of like 3 lobes. Alright? So, it has a multi-segmented nucleus. So, that is for a neutrophil. Next, figure B shows us a basophil. All right, this one is a basophil. So notice the intense amount of granules within its cytoplasm. Sobrang dami niya pong granules, no? That it's almost covering the entire of the cytoplasm. Again, basophils are the least common white blood cell that we have in our circulation, and very rare lang din po na makakita ng ganito. Next are eosinophils. So we would know that it is an eosinophil by looking at two things. First one, it has a very eosinophilic color, or kumbaga is parang mas pink or almost reddish na siya after staining in comparison to the other cells, diba? Let's look at the other cells. They may appear very bluish or purplish in color, diba? Blue or purple yung ibang mga cells. Pero ang mga eosinophils po, medyo mas papunta na siya dun sa pink or red na color. And another thing that we may be able to notice is that it also has a multi-segmented nucleus, pero into two parts lang po. Alright, so this one is kind of cute. It looks like it has glasses. Alright, so again, isa lang yung nucleus niya. Okay, pero may segment siya that makes it look like there's two of them. So again, figure C, this shows us an eosinophil. Next is figure D. Figure D shows us a lymphocyte. So ito po, isang lymphocyte. So nabanggit natin kanina, diba, that there are two types, yung T cell and B cell. Visually, we really won't be able to know the difference. So all lymphocytes, regardless kung T cell or B cell, they look like this. So notice na medyo malaki yung nucleus niya. It has a really big nucleus that almost takes up the entire cell. Tapos sobrang nipis na lang nung area where it still has visible cytoplasm. Alright. Also, in terms of size, lymphocytes are smaller in comparison to neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils. Alright. So, siguro kinrap lang nila itong picture na to. That's why it looks like the same size as the others, but typically, no, for the most part or usually, lymphocytes are smaller in comparison to the other WBCs. Next, figure E shows us a monocyte or a macrophage. So monocytes, one of the, or two, actually, two remarkable characteristics about monocytes is that they're visibly larger, alright? Sobrang mas malaki sila in comparison to the other four WBCs. And next thing that we may be able to notice is that it has a kidney bean-shaped nucleus, alright? Hugis beans daw po yung nucleus niya, as we can see right here in this picture. Alright, so those are the two things that we need to look at or notice kung isang monocyte or macrophage yung tinitignan natin. Again, it has a very big size and it has a kidney bean-shaped nucleus. Let's now talk about platelets. Platelets are minute or tiny fragments of cells, each consisting of a small amount of cytoplasm surrounded by a cell membrane. So saan daw po ba gawa ang platelets? Platelets are produced in the red bone marrow from large cells referred to as megakaryocytes. Alright? So natignan natin, or kung maalala nyo po yung illustration kanina, diba? We would start off with one hematopoietic stem cell. After that, the hematopoietic stem cell would go through the route of becoming a myeloid stem cell, diba? Pag naging myeloid stem cell siya, it could differentiate and become a megakaryocyte. The megakaryocyte is actually a large cell. Pero po, for the megakaryocyte to create the platelets, it needs to break off into tiny pieces. So, yung mga platelets po ay fragments lang daw po nung megakaryocyte. Alright, so small fragments would break off from the megakaryocytes and enter the blood as platelets. So the platelets play an important role in preventing blood loss. Again, if you've seen the anime cells at work, di ba po? Yung mga platelets, no? They're like tiny little children. So parang ganun din po, no? Parang maliliit na cells lang din daw po ang mga platelets. This slide simply talks about blood loss. So when blood vessels are damaged, obviously blood will leak out of the blood vessel into the other tissues and disrupt normal function. Alright? So, ulitin natin, no? Ang blood natin, it should only exist within the blood vessels and nagsa-circulate siya within the circulation through the blood vessels. So, blood shouldn't be present anywhere else. Okay? So, hindi daw po dapat tumatagas dun sa ibang mga tissues natin yung blood. Alright? So, what would happen during damages to our blood vessels, there would be a leaking out of the blood, and this could lead to blood loss if hindi masosolusyonan agad. So, blood that is lost must be replaced by production of new blood or by transfusion in severe cases. Now, how do we prevent blood loss? Or specifically, how does our body prevent blood loss? What does our body do? Alright? Ano yung mga bagay na capable yung body natin of doing to prevent blood loss? So there are three things: vascular spasm, platelet plug formation, and blood clotting. Alright? So ayan, vascular spasm, this is the temporary constriction or pagsikip ng daanan ng mga blood vessels natin. Next, platelet plug formation. Platelet plugs, they can seal up small breaks in blood vessels. Mamaya i-discuss din po natin how platelet plugs are created as well as how blood clotting would happen. One way as to how blood loss may be controlled is through vascular spasms, or the immediate but temporary constriction of blood vessels through the contraction of the smooth muscles present along our blood vessels. Now, if you would remember our discussion on the muscular system, di ba po? It was mentioned that smooth muscles are involuntary with regards to their movement. No? We don't have conscious control over smooth muscles, di ba po? And they are usually present where? Saan daw po tayo makakahanap ng mga smooth muscles? In the walls of our hollow organs and along our blood vessels. Alright? So, ito po yung pakinabang nila, no? The smooth muscles within our blood vessels, they can temporarily contract, no, in times of injury in an attempt to lessen blood loss, especially in smaller blood vessels, since maliit lang po sila and they could easily be closed off during vascular spasm. Now, how does the vessels know when to contract? Alright, so paano po nalalaman ng mga blood vessels natin na kailangan nilang kumilos or kailangan ng kumilos ng mga smooth muscles nila? Now, vascular spasm happens because damaged blood vessels actually release chemicals that could trigger vascular spasm. Plus, yung mga platelets din po, they could also release chemicals that could tell smooth muscles to perform vascular spasm. Alright? So, ulitin natin, kapag may tissue damage daw po or damage to the blood vessels, may nare-release ng mga chemicals to trigger vascular spasm. Another way as to how blood loss may be controlled is through the formation of platelet plugs. Alright? So again, focus po muna tayo dito sa mga statements that have been highlighted. First thing that happens is platelet adhesion. Kapag nagkaroon daw po ng damage or injury to our blood vessels, the platelets within the circulation would stick to the exposed collagen. Alright? So once they stick or adhere to the collagen, ma-activate daw po yung mga platelets and they'll change their shape and also release chemicals. Alright? So, ulitin po natin, tatlong bagay po yung mangyayari kapag dumikit na po yung platelets dun sa exposed collagen fibers nung nasira na blood vessel in a process that we would refer to as platelet adhesion. So, first, platelets would become activated. Second, platelets would change shape. And third, platelets would release chemicals. Next thing that would happen is platelet aggregation. Alright? So, you remember fibrinogen? Diba? Fibrinogen po, that one protein in our blood that makes up 4% of our plasma. Now, platelets, they actually have receptors on their surface so that fibrinogen could attach to them. And then they would form bridges connecting all of the other platelets to one another, resulting into a platelet plug. All right, so this slide shows us the things that would happen as I've previously explained on the previous slide. All right, so again, when there is tissue damage or damage to our blood vessels, all right, first thing that would happen is platelet adhesion. So the platelets would adhere or stick to the exposed collagen fibers. Next, they would become activated and release chemicals, as you can see here on step 2. After that, there would be platelet aggregation with the help of fibrinogen. So fibrinogen would create these bridges linking together all of the other platelets. So once this is successfully performed, this would create one entire platelet plug. Next is blood clotting. This happens when the usual liquid form of the human blood is transformed into a gel. So let's just quickly define what is a clot. Okay, so a blood clot is a network of thread-like proteins. These thread-like proteins are called fibrin. And what they do is they act like a net or a mesh that can trap blood cells and fluids. So the formation of blood clots are dependent upon the presence of clotting factors. Now, what are clotting factors? Now, these are proteins that are also present in the plasma that are activated only after an injury happens. Okay? So ulitin natin, ang mga clotting factors daw po, they are present in our plasma all the time, but they are not activated. No? They are only activated after an injury would happen. So ito rin po yung dahilan kung bakit as a normal, healthy human, no, hindi po tayo basta-basta nagkakaroon ng blood clot. Kasi ma-activate lang po yung mga proteins na ito at mag-work lang sila if an injury is present. These clotting factors are created in the liver and they would require the presence of vitamin K. So wag pong kakalimutan ha kung nasaan po nakikreate ang mga clotting factors sa liver. Anong vitamin ang kailangan nila? Vitamin K. Let's now talk about the steps in clot formation. So itong listahan po na ito, this is just a simplified version. So pagdating niyo po sa hematology classes nyo in your third year, you'll learn more about these specific events and chemicals involved in the fulfillment of these steps. But for now, in basic anatomy and physiology, no, para po sa inyo na mga first year pa lang, ito lang po muna yung kailangan nating aralin. So first, an injury would lead to the activation of clotting factors. Second, the enzyme prothrombinase would act upon prothrombin. Third, prothrombin is activated at magiging thrombin na po siya. Alright? Fourth step, thrombin would now work to activate fibrinogen. So fibrinogen would now become fibrin. And on the last step, no, fibrin would form a network or a mesh-looking thing that would trap blood that is leaking out of the injured blood vessels. Alright? So, ayan po. Ulitin po natin yon. First step, no, magkakaroon muna ng injury. Pag nagkaroon ng injury, tsaka lang ma-activate yung mga clotting factors. Second step, mag-work yung enzyme na prothrombinase. Alright? Lagi po natin tatandaan, no, when a substance has the suffix ase or ase sa dulo, it's probably an enzyme. All right? So again, the enzyme prothrombinase would act on the protein prothrombin. All right? Now, ang mangyayari po yung prothrombin, ma-activate siya, magiging na siya thrombin. Okay? So, ayan, fourth step, thrombin would now work to activate fibrinogen. And fibrinogen would now become fibrin. And on the last step, ayun nga po, a fibrin network would form. So this is kind of like a net or a mesh-looking structure that is capable of trapping blood and preventing them from leaking out of the injured blood vessels. So this chart right here just shows us kind of like a flow chart format as to how blood clot formation would happen. So ito rin po yung explain natin kanina, but in a flow chart format. So I highly suggest po, no, that when listening to these recorded discussions, you would also have your textbook right next to you para kahit po wala pa tayo sa slide na yon dito sa video na to, no, you could look at the illustration as you're listening to my explanation. Kung nahihirapan pa rin po kayong i-visualize ito, you could go watch that one episode of the anime Cells at Work titled Scrape Wound, where they show you how platelets make platelet plugs and blood clots, as we can see right here in these illustrations. Let's now talk about how clot formation is controlled. Okay, so masama rin naman po na tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung blood clotting kahit sarado naman na yung site of injury. So it says here that clots need to be controlled so they don't spread throughout the body. So the clot also needs to be confined at the site of injury. Kung nasaan lang yung injury, doon lang dapat may blood clot, not anywhere else. So in the human body, we naturally have these two anticoagulants, heparin and antithrombin. Okay, ulitin po natin yon. In the human body, we naturally produce two types of anticoagulants, heparin and antithrombin. Now, what are the two things that could happen kapag magaling na yung site of injury? Alright, so kapag magaling na po yung site of injury, no, the site of injury has fully healed, two things could happen: clot retraction and fibrinolysis. So clot retraction, this is the condensing or basically shrinking of the clot. So what would happen here is the serum in plasma is squeezed out of the clot. So basically yung fluid content daw po na nasa loob ng blood clot, it would be squeezed out or kumbaga is mapipiga siya. No? So this would help in enhancing the healing process. Alright? So ayun po, ulitin natin, no? When a tissue that has been damaged or injured, no, is undergoing the process of healing, no. Kung halimbawa hindi pa ito fully healed, no, first thing na pwede mangyari is clot retraction. So again, magko-condense or mag-shrink na daw po yung clot para i-squeeze out yung plasma na nasa loob ng clot. So ang mangyayari, makakatulong ito para mapabilis yung healing process. Next is fibrinolysis. So fibrinolysis, no, dissolving of the fibrin clot. Alright? So, i-dissolve na daw po yung fibrin mesh na na-create earlier. So, this is executed with the help of plasminogen. So, plasminogen, this is a type of plasma protein that could break down the fibrin clot. So, basically, ang plasminogen daw po, ang trabaho niya is sisirain na niya yung fibrin clot na form earlier kapag po ay na sa healing stage na yung injured na tissue. Let's now talk about blood grouping or kung paano na-determine yung iba't ibang mga blood types natin. Alright? So right here is just a few definition of terms. First up is transfusion reactions, otherwise referred to as agglutination. So transfusion reactions, this could be observed through the clumping of blood vessels, nagdidikit, or blood cells, sorry, the clumping of blood cells. Alright, so nagdidikit-dikit daw po yung mga blood cells natin. And this is actually funny. Ito po talaga yung original parang word na linagay nila dito sa slide na to ng McGraw-Hill. It says that this is bad. Okay? So, ang clumping of blood cells daw po, that is bad. Alright? So, hindi daw po tama or masama daw po na nagdidikit-dikit yung mga blood cells natin. Next, antigens. So antigens, these are molecules on the surface of RBCs. Alright? So yung RBCs daw po natin, may mga structure sila sa ibabaw ng cells nila that is referred to as antigens. Yung mga antigens na ito yung nagde-determine ng iba't ibang blood types natin. So blood type A, B, AB, and type O. Alright, again, these were determined because of the structures of those antigens. Again, these antigens are found on the surface of RBCs. Next are antibodies. So antibodies, these are proteins in the plasma that could bind to specific antigens. Alright, so may mga antibodies daw po tayo dun sa fluid portion ng blood cells, or ng blood natin in general, no? Alright, ulitin natin. On the liquid portion of our blood, we have antibodies. They're capable of binding to specific antigens. So kung halimbawa hindi nagmamatch yung antigens and antibodies dun sa RBCs ng isang person after blood transfusion, that could lead to yun nga, a transfusion reaction, which is not a good thing. We'll explain more about that later. But next, we have what is known as blood groups. So they are named according to the antigen that they have. Or yun nga po, type A, type B, type AB, or O. Right, let's now talk about the ABO blood group. So ito na po yung mismong usapan as to how our blood types are determined. So ayan po, the ABO blood group system has a type A antigen and type B antigen. Ulitin natin tulad ng nabanggit sa previous na slide, yung antigens po, these are the structures on the surface of the RBCs. Alright, so a type A blood, okay, ulitin natin kung isa ka daw person na type A yung blood mo, yung surface ng RBCs mo, may structure referred to as type A antigens. Na kung halimbawa, ang blood type mo naman ay B, yung ibabaw ng blood cells mo, merong mga type B antigens. And for a person classified as a type AB, they have both of that. Alright? So, ulitin po natin kung halimbawa ang blood type mo ay AB, you have both the A antigen and B antigen on the surface of your RBC. Next, for people out there with a type O blood, they have neither A or B antigens. So, kung halimbawa daw po kayo ay type O, yung blood ninyo, no, it means wala kayo nung kahit alin dun sa mga nabanggit na antigens. So, you have a smooth RBC. Alright. If anybody knows that reference, no, you have a smooth brain. Dito naman po, you have a smooth RBC. No A or B antigens, alright? So, yan po. These types of antigens found on the surface of the RBCs are genetically determined, alright? So, this is basically in accordance to also the blood type of your parents. Let's now talk about antibodies, alright? Kanina dun sa previous slide, ang pinag-usapan natin ay yung mga antigens on the surface of your RBCs. Let's now talk about the antibodies present in your plasma, alright? So these are antibodies against antigens usually present in the plasma of the blood. So the plasma from a type A blood contains anti-B antibodies. Okay? Ulitin po natin yon. Kung halimbawa, isa kang person with a type A blood, meron ka daw antibodies laban sa mga type B. Okay? So, hindi ka pwedeng salinan ng dugo galing sa isang person na type B. Kasi, kukontrahin ng plasma or kukontrahin ng antibodies sa plasma mo yung mga antigens on the surface of that type B blood. Alright? So, ang pwede lang i-donate sa'yo ay type A. Alright? Dahil nga, meron kang antibodies laban sa type B. Okay? On the other hand, no, people with type B blood contains anti-A antibodies. Okay? So, ulitin natin. Same scenario, baliktad lang. Kung halimbawa, isa kang person na type B yung blood mo, you have plasma antibodies laban sa mga type A blood cells. So, kung halimbawa, hindi sinasadyang matransfusan ka ng blood galing sa isang type A na person, magre-react yung mga antibodies mo at kakalabanin niya yung type A na blood cells. Alright? So, sana naintindihan po yun. Okay? Ulitin natin. If a person has type A blood, they have anti-B antibodies. If a person has type B blood, they have anti-A antibodies. Basically, kukontrahin niya yung hindi niya kaparehas. Alright? Now, a type AB blood plasma has neither the type of antibody, wala siyang anti-A, wala siyang anti-B. Okay? Ulitin natin, no? Kung halimbawa, you're a person with type AB, ibig sabihin yung surface ng RBCs mo may structure both for type A and type B. So therefore, yung plasma mo hindi magpo-produce ng antibodies against either type A or type B. Kasi alangan namang kontrahin niya yung mga bagay na meron siya. Alright? So again, type AB blood does not have anti-A or anti-B antibodies. Alright? Pero baliktarin natin yung scenario. For people with type O blood, ulitin natin, no? Anong meron sa mga type O blood sa surface ng cell nila? wala, diba? They don't have the A antigen, they don't have the B antigen. Therefore, para sa mga tao na type O yung blood, kalaban lahat ng ibang klase ng RBCs. So for type O blood, their plasma has both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. Alright, ulitin natin yon. If you are a person with a type O blood, you don't have the A antigen, you don't have the B antigen. So for you, that is a foreign structure. Therefore, your plasma would have anti-A and anti-B. So kung halimbawa, you're a person with type O blood, tas accidentally nasalinan ka ng either type A or type B, kakalabanin yun yung plasma antibodies mo because your antibodies, you have both anti-A and anti-B. Again, that's for type O blood. Okay, so with the help of this illustration, I hope you would understand better. Pag-usapan muna natin yung mismong mga RBCs, alright? So in this example, yung mga type A blood, meron silang circular antigens or circular structures on their surface. Yung mga type B na blood, they have these cone-shaped or pointy structures on their surface. Alright, if a person is AB, they have both circular and pointy. But if a person is type O, no, you have a smooth RBC. No A antigen, no B antigen. Smooth RBC. Alright, so ayan po. Ito yung itsura ng blood cells ng mga tao depending on their blood type. Okay, so this is just an example, ha? So again, for type A, no, for example, they have circular antigens on their surface. For type B, they have pointy antigens on their surface. Now, kung ano yung blood type mo, yun yung kabaliktaran ng antibodies na meron ka. So, for people who are type A, yung antibodies nila are anti-B. So, meron silang antibodies na yung structure ay mag-fit dun sa pointy structure nung B antigen, as we can see right here. Alright, ulitin natin, kung ang isang tao ay kung ang isang tao ay type A, what they have is anti-B. Yung structure ng antibody nila, it fits the pointy structure of the B antigen. Kung babalik na rin naman natin, if a person is type B, they have antibodies which have shapes that would fit the circular structure of the A antigen. So, ito kasi yung magkakalaban. Alright? Now, if for example, a person is type AB, they wouldn't produce any antibodies against that. Kasi nga, meron naman sila parehas nito. So, alangan naman kalabanin nila yung sarili nila. Diba? So, that wouldn't happen. They don't have antibodies against the circular A or the pointy B. Next, again, if a person is type O and they don't have these antigens on the surface of their blood, they would have antibodies against both A antigen and B antigens. Alright? Dahil wala sila ng mga bagay na to, kalaban nila yung ibang mga cells na may ganitong structure. So it has an anti-A antibody, which would fit the circular structure of the A antigen, and it has an anti-B antibody, which would fit the pointed structure of the antigen B. All right, so I hope with this illustration you finally understood how blood groupings would look like and how the antibodies would be produced. Now, understanding the principle or the idea of antigens on the surface of RBCs and the antibodies present in their plasma, I hope you would also understand yung idea or yung concept of donating and receiving blood. All right? So type O, they are universal donors because they have no antigens. All right? So kung isa ka daw po na type O na person, you could donate to anybody because wala pong antigens yung surface ng RBCs nyo. So hindi sila kayang kalabanin nung antibodies na meron yung ibang mga blood types like A, B, or AB. Next, a blood type A can only receive type A or type O blood. Pwede siyang tumanggap ng type A kasi kapwa niya yun, hindi niya yung kakalabanin. Pwede siyang mag-receive ng type O blood kasi wala namang antigens sa surface ng type O blood. So, wala din kakapitan yung mga antibodies niya. Next, if a person is type B, it could only receive blood from a person who is also type B, or yung katulad niya, and from a person who is type O, which again doesn't have antigens, so it has nowhere for their antibodies to bind to. Okay? Ulitin natin, ang mga type A meron silang anti-B. Ang mga type B meron silang anti-A. Okay? So sila lang po yung mag-aaway, no? Sila lang yung magko-kontra-kontra. Pero hindi nila aawayin yung mga type O kasi wala namang antigens sa surface ng cells nila. Next, type AB, next, type AB, they are universal recipients. So they can receive blood from AB, or type O blood. Okay? So kahit alin, pwedeng tumanggap sa kahit kanino ang type AB na mga person. So AB, universal recipient. Type O, universal donor. Next, type O blood can only receive from type O blood. So again, if ang blood type nyo po ay O, pwede lang kayong tumanggap, no, ng blood transfusion from another person who's also type O. Kasi po, 'di ba, lahat ng ibang mga blood types meron silang antigen sa surface nila. Therefore, ang mga tao ng type O, meron silang antibodies, no, against all these different antigens. So medyo lugi yung mga type O, no? Type O, universal donor. Pwede ka mag-donate kahit kanino, pero hindi ka pwedeng mag-receive galing kahit kanino. So, yun po. Again, that's the concept of being a donor or being a recipient in accordance to your ABO blood group. Next, let's just quickly talk about the RH blood group, all right? So being RH positive means you have RH antigens. Now, if you would observe, no, our blood typing results, may mga positive, negative pa yan sa dulo, di ba? A positive, B positive, O positive, A negative, AB negative. May mga ganun pa po yan, di ba? So yung positive or negative symbol sa dulo, that refers to our RH blood group, all right? So 95 to 85% of the population is RH positive. So karamihan daw po sa atin ay RH positive. RH negative people are usually observed among Caucasians, all right? Nasa Caucasian population po karamihan ng mga RH negative. But for everybody else around the world, no, karamihan sa atin talaga ay RH positive. So antibodies only develop if an RH person is exposed to RH blood, either via transfusion or from mother to fetus, all right? So ayun po, ang mga RH negative na person, hindi katulad ng ABO na automatic pinanganak ka na may anti-A or anti-B. Ang mga RH negative na person daw po, hindi sila agad-agad pinanganak or automatically merong anti-RH na antibody. Okay? Nagde-develop lang daw po sila ng anti-RH, no, antibodies, if they are exposed to blood that is RH positive. Let's talk a bit more about RH incompatibility during pregnancy. Now, let's take, for example, a mother that is RH negative. Alright? For example, meron daw pong isang pregnant person na RH negative yung blood type niya. Alright? And then, they kind of like conceive a fetus that is RH positive. So, kung halimbawa, yung husband nitong person na to ay RH positive, tas minana nung baby yung pagiging RH positive, no? Ang mangyayari, a mother with an RH negative blood type would be exposed to a baby, no? Would be carrying a fetus or a baby that is RH positive, all right? So the mother can now be exposed to RH positive blood if fetal blood would leak through the placenta. So kung halimbawa yung blood daw po ng baby na RH positive is nag-leak papalabas ng placenta, madedetect ito nung immune system ng mother na RH negative. So the first time that this occurs, the mother's blood would produce antibodies against those antigens. So wala pa tayong mga negative effects na mapapansin. Kasi dun sa time na pregnancy ng RH negative mother, nagpo-produce pa lang ng antibodies yung mother against RH positive blood. Alright? So if, for example, any repeated mixing of blood could now cause a reaction. So kung halimbawa, sa second pregnancy nitong mother na to ay Rh positive ulit yung anak nila, nagmana ulit dun sa papa in terms of blood type, ayan na, pwede nang mag-react yung mga antibodies na na-produce nung Rh negative mother from their first pregnancy, causing some type of reaction. Or yun nabanggit natin kanina, there could be clumping of the blood cells. This would now lead to what is known as the hemolytic disease of the newborn. So this happens when a mother produces anti-Rh antibodies. Ulitin natin, ang mother na to ay Rh negative. So it produces anti-Rh antibodies that is also capable of crossing the placenta and causing agglutination and hemolysis of fetal erythrocytes. So basically, magpaproduce ng anti-Rh antibody yung Rh negative na mother para kalabanin yung blood ng fetus, which could be fatal for the fetus, all right? This could kill the baby that she's currently having, all right? So this is prevented if the mother is treated with RhoGAM, which contains antibodies against Rh antigen. So basically, if alam naman na, no, if aware naman na yung mother and if aware na yung physician niya, no, na Rh negative itong person na ito, dapat mabigyan na siya nitong program bago yung pregnancies niya or bago yung mga paparating niya na pregnancies para hindi na mangyari itong hemolytic disease of the newborn. Alright, so this slide right here is just an illustration of all the things that we've explained earlier. Let's now talk about diagnostic blood tests. Alright, so again, for this segment of our discussion, medyo superficial lang muna yung discussion natin. Hindi pa natin i-discuss yung further details on how these things are performed and what diseases could be found out through these results. Kasi po, again, this is something that you would talk more about pagdating nyo sa hematology classes nyo in your third year. Alright, but first up, we have what is known as the complete blood count, otherwise referred to as CBC. Alright, complete blood count or CBC. This provides information such as RBC count, hemoglobin, hematocrit, and WBC count. So this is generally just a list, a list of results containing the amount of the different formed elements in your blood, as well as the other kind of like criteria like hemoglobin and hematocrit. Sa hematocrit naman po, this is the percentage of total blood volume composed of RBCs. So basically, just to oversimplify kung ano ang hematocrit, sinasabi po dito na among the entire components of your blood, yung pinakita natin kanina, di ba, na may plasma, may buffy coat, may sediment na RBC sa ilalim. Among that entire component, alin yung total blood volume mo na puro RBCs lang yung component. Alright? So again, this is the hematocrit. Next is hemoglobin level. So this determines the amount of hemoglobin within your blood. So this indicates anemia. So kung mababa daw po, sobrang baba ng hemoglobin levels ng isang person, this could mean that a person has some form of anemia. Next, we also have what is known as the white blood cell count. So this is just the total number of white blood cells. Again, alalahanin po yung illustration na nakita natin kanina. Dun sa entire blood composition natin, alin doon, gaano karami yung white blood cells nyo lang. Okay? So, ayan po. So, again, yung hematocrit, nakafocus sa blood volume nyo that is composed of RBCs, ang white blood cell count naman literally just counts the number of white blood cells. And this may also be further segmented into the different types of cells. So maaaring may count specifically for neutrophils, count for the specific amount of basophils, eosinophils, and also the monocytes or macrophages. And of course, yung lymphocytes. So, ayun po, may mga WBC count kung saan po, pinaghihiwa-hiwalay pa nila yung bilang nung lahat ng ibang mga white blood cells, yung 5. So this is what I was talking about in the previous slide. Ang mga WBC count po, this could further be divided into their differential count. Alright? So differential count would determine the percentage of each 5 kinds of WBCs. Alright? So nakalista po dito Now, listed here are the normal percentages. Tulad na nabanggit kanina, neutrophils are the most abundant. Sila yung pinakamarami. So, they account for 60 to 70% of our total amount of leukocytes. Up next are lymphocytes. It is expected na yung lymphocytes po natin is nasa 20 to 25% ng total WBC count. Next, konti lang po, no? Sobrang konti lang nitong tatlong ito. Monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. So here are their expected percentages. Alright, again, pinakamarami, neutrophils. Second na pinakamarami, lymphocytes. Pinakakonti is basophils. This slide right here just quickly talks about white blood cell disorders, or two white blood cell disorders. First is leukopenia and leukocytosis. So leukopenia, there is low white blood cell count. Masyadong konti daw po, no? There's not enough, or there's decreased levels of white blood cells within your circulation. So listed here are possible causes. Excessive exposure to radiation. Of course, ang isa or dalawang x-ray lang hindi ito makaka-apekto. But if patuloy po kayong na-expose to radiation, this could be bad and lead to leukopenia. Alright, so radiation, chemotherapy, the formation of tumors and viral infections could lead to leukopenia. Next is leukocytosis, all right? So the leukocytosis, there is high amounts of WBCs. So tumataas naman po, or sobrang dami ng WBCs compared to normal. All right? So these may be caused by infections or leukemia. All right? So sa mga infections po, since we need more cells to fight off the infection, more cells would be produced. So sa differential count po natin, maaring mas tumaas yung mga WBCs. And next is leukemia, which is a type of disease kung saan yung ang may problema naman is yung production of WBCs. No, there's excessive production of WBCs leading to leukocytosis. If you belong to my lecture classes, this ends our discussion on the human blood. Thank you so much for listening. If you belong to my laboratory classes, let's proceed to the microscopic anatomy. This slide right here just shows us kind of like all the different cellular components of the blood that we've discussed earlier together in one microscopic field. So lahat po ng ito, yung mga nakikita natin na red dito na red on the inside, tas parang clear on the inside, these are our RBCs, diba? So as previously discussed, no, RBCs, they have a thicker edge and a kind of like a dented middle. So yung tinatawag na biconcave disc. So makapal sa labas, tas paloob yung gitna. Alright, next one, this is a lymphocyte. Again, lymphocytes, usually they have a really big nucleus, tapos sobrang nipis na lang no makikita natin na cytoplasm. This one is a neutrophil. So tulad din ng example ng neutrophil na nakita natin kanina, it only has one nucleus, pero it is segmented into two. And then another observation that we may be able to see is that its granules appear very pink or acidophilic in appearance. Next, as we can see right here, this is a platelet. So again, platelets, diba, they are just fragments from the megakaryocyte. So that's why they're very tiny. Next, right here, we have a neutrophil, as I've already mentioned earlier, no, they're multi-segmented. So iisa lang yung nucleus niya, pero mukhang madami kasi may mga segments. I think what they didn't show here is a basophil kasi nga po, di ba? Sobrang konti lang ng mga basophils sa circulation natin. Here are more examples of the white blood cells. Ayan po. So, iba-ibang pictures lang, no, para po masanay yung paningin ninyo, no, na, ayun po, mag-observe ng iba't ibang klaseng white blood cells. Because, of course, no, when you're new to studying our white blood cells, this may be difficult for you. For some people out there, they may look very similar. Diba? But again, we're right here studying the differences para, ayun po, sa isang tingin lang natin, no, maintindihan natin kung ano yung pinagkaiba nila. Again, neutrophils, they have multi-segmented nucleus. So, iisa lang yung nucleus nila, pero may hati-hati, kaya mukhang madami. Eosinophils, they have a very acidophilic kind of appearance, so very pink or red yung itsura ng cytoplasm nila or yung mga granules dun sa loob ng cytoplasm nila. And again, they have also just one nucleus, but it is segmented into two. All right, so this is what it looks like if we're looking at a eosinophil. Next is a basophil. Again, as I've mentioned earlier, basophils, they have so much granules na halos yung buong cell, no? Hindi na natin ma-determine nasaan ba yung nucleus niya, nasaan ba yung cytoplasm niya, because it's very much covered by granules. Next, this one is a lymphocyte. Again, they are a bit smaller compared to all the other cells, no? Tignan natin to, medyo mas malaki lang siya ng konti sa isang RBC. And again, lymphocytes, no, they have a very big nucleus and sobrang nipis na lang nung cytoplasm na nakikita natin. Again, we will not be able to determine just by visual examination if a lymphocyte is a T cell or a B cell. Alright, so lahat po ng lymphocytes, ganito ang itsura. Next is a monocyte or a macrophage. Again, they are visibly larger in comparison to all of the other white blood cells. Sobrang mas malaki sila, and again, their nucleus has been described as kidney bean shape. Alright, hugis bean daw po yung nucleus niya. So again, this is a monocyte. Let's now look at the microscopic anatomical difference between yellow marrow versus red bone marrow. Alright, dahil nabanggit po natin kanina, di ba? Blood cell production usually happens at the red bone marrow and at some lymphatic tissues. So yellow bone marrow, they don't have any capability to produce blood cells, because if we look right here, no, yellow bone marrow is mostly composed of adipocytes or fat cells and decalcified bone. Alright, so hindi na po nakakapag-produce ng blood cells ang yellow bone marrow, and ito po yung itsura nila on microscopic anatomy. Again, mostly composed of adipocytes. Now let's look at red bone marrow. Alright, so right here we can see that there are different areas now where different cells may be produced. So sa red bone marrow, we may be able to observe the megakaryocyte. Nasa looban daw po ng red bone marrow yung mga megakaryocyte. So again, a megakaryocyte would break off into tiny pieces, and then this would produce the platelets. So yung mga platelets po, sila yung lalabas ng red bone marrow papunta sa circulation natin. Next, we have the blood-producing cells or the hematopoietic tissues. So yung hematopoietic tissues or stem cells po natin, ito yung mga diniscuss natin kanina that could either undergo through myeloid stem cell differentiation or lymphoid stem cell differentiation. Alright? So upon microscopic anatomy, ganito po yung itsura ng red bone marrow. So very obvious naman yung difference in comparison to yellow bone marrow. Right here is just another photo of our red bone marrow. Again, para lang po ma-familiarize kayo or kumbaga magkaroon kayo ng iba't ibang mga views. First up, at the outermost portion, we have the compact bone. So, kumbaga, pinoprotektahan po ng compact bone yung inside wherein we would find the red bone marrow. So, again, we would be able to observe megakaryocytes and some of the other developing cells. We may also find a vascular sinus or yung areas kung saan pwedeng dumaan yung mga capillaries natin to also still provide nutrients for this area, or nutrients and oxygen and other materials that is needed by the entire red bone marrow. This ends our discussion on the human blood as well as the microscopic anatomy of the human blood. Again, I am Aurel Enriquez. Thank you so much for listening.